Good evening and happy New Year's, everyone. My name is Mike Haney, and welcome to another edition of 60 Minutes in Black America, the first edition of 2023. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Good evening again and happy New Year. And as you can see, I gave the production team off. I forgot to even bring myself back in. And happy New Year to everyone. Our production team is not with us because we just thought they deserved to celebrate New Year's with their family, just like last week, Christmas Day. We gave them the day off as well. And what a fantastic Christmas Day show that we had. Got a lot of feedback from you. Enjoyed the Morehouse Choir. You enjoyed the Spelman Choir. Anitra McKinney did a absolutely outstanding job, as well as Quincy Jones and his musical choir. Just an outstanding Christmas Day show. And we have a very similarly good show today as we look back on 2022. We look forward to 2023, and we have two of our esteemed political analysts with us today, Beverly Cooper Wiele, as well as Robert Dashiell, Bob Dashiell, Attorney Dashiell. They've been with us a number of times in 2022, and they give us a perspective, their perspective of what 2022 gained us as a community, as well as what we could look forward to in 2023. But, let's talk about a few things before we bring them on to really get an analytical look of our communities across America. The Black demographics is still 13%, or approximately 47.8 million people are in the United States of America that are of African descent, African American. As I said a couple of weeks ago, I've stopped using the terminology Black because we all originate from Africa that have come from this country. And so we're African American. So about 47%, 47 million of us in America are African American. And boy, do we have an expectation in this country to be treated equally? Not sure what equal means, but I'm sure Bob and Bev have their perspective of what equal means and what equal looks like. But let me talk about a couple of things that have happened since we last spoke politics. We, of course, are aware that Herschel Walker, the great football player, lost to Raphael Warnock December 6th in the runoff that gave the U.S. Senate a majority. Can't say it was a super majority, but it gave them a majority. But as I have told people, just to have two African Americans, whether you like them or not, running off for a U.S. Senate seat was astronomical here in this country. And then in December as well, the January 6th, and everyone recalls January 6th of 2021, when Donald Trump led troops of insurrectionists stormed the Capitol, killing police officers, injuring police officers. And, what was profound is what we heard from the sergeant of arms, a black sergeant of arms, who said himself when he spoke in front of the Senate and he gave testimony about January 6th, he said that if those insurrectionists that stormed the Capitol on January 6th of 2021 were black or African American, they would have been treated differently. We all realize that. We all realize that Donald Trump and his cronies from across the country were treated absolutely different. But what's happening now is that you're seeing a lot of them go to jail, as well as what I believe Donald Trump ultimately will go to jail as well. I believe that Donald Trump will be a sample of our legal system in terms of every person in this country being treated equally. And I think that Donald Trump is going to jail at some point, somewhere, be it Georgia, be it New York, be it in a federal prison. Donald Trump is going to jail for January 6th, and as well as many of the other atrocities that he has brought on in this country. And let's get a picture of Donald Trump. Can everyone see our good president, Donald Trump, up here? And then there's another guy that I just can't explain. So Donald Trump being referred to by the U.S. House Representative, their commission on January 6th for indictment, being referred to the Justice Department. And then there's this other guy, Kanye West. Man, where did this guy come from? I have no idea, where this guy, this African American, comes from. Who with his anti-Semitic remarks. They say that he's brilliant. I don't think he's brilliant. I think that there's something mentally wrong with him and that he is quite disturbed. So you got Kanye last year making the news, saying that he's going to run for president, teaming up with Donald Trump at his house in Mar-a-Lago, telling Donald that perhaps he shouldn't run because Kanye is going to run. And then what does Kanye do? He brings some of the truth seekers and another insurrectionist down to Donald Trump's house, and Donald Trump entertains him. But this guy, man, I don't know. I hope in 2023 we figure out Kanye West and not support his albums, not support his music, because this guy is trouble in America. But, on to a better note, in 2022, we had a Supreme Court Justice, Justice Brown Jackson, that was sworn in by the Senate back in June, I believe, as the first female Black U.S. justice in these Americas. So a real proud moment in America for Ketanji Brown Jackson to United States Supreme Court, nominated by President Joe Biden. And let's stay on politics for a minute. And there's Wes Moore. We've had 3 Black governors in these United States. Doug Wilder was the first Black governor from the state of Virginia. Deval Patrick from the state of Massachusetts, where Beverly resides. I'm going to ask her what the state looked like when Governor Patrick ruled. But Wes Moore became the third Black governor in these United States for the state of Maryland. So congratulations to Wes Moore, who claimed victory over a Trump-backed supporter, Dan Cox, back in November of 2022. And then Hakeem Jeffries from New York. Hakeem was named Speaker of the House. We're proud of Hakeem. Hakeem hails from New York, did a fantastic job as a case manager with, I think it was the first Donald Trump, when the House tried to impeach Donald Trump the first time. Well, he takes Nancy Pelosi's place, and we're expecting big things from Hakeem. Brittany Griner, political pawn that Russia used when Russia invaded Ukraine and United States got involved. Russia took this Black athlete who represented our country so well and made a big deal out of a small amount of marijuana oil or something that she took over the country. Well, she was freed in December of this year, incarcerated in February of last year. So while we still don't have the equation of power in this country, we see that we still can be used as pawns around this country. So before we get into any more about some of the good things that have happened and some of the challenging things that have happened in 2023, let's bring Beverly and Bob. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Hi there, Bob.
Happy New Year.
Thank you both so much for being here, Bob. I know you got a football game to go coach or to cheer your local team on. So we're going to make sure that we are on time in terms of getting you out here so you can. What team is it that you support, Bob?
Uh, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that, but for Beverly, it's the Ravens. That's my team.
So you're a Raven fan. Well, we'll make sure you get out here to see the Ravens. Who are they playing tonight?
The boys from from the Three River area. I think they call themselves Steelers.
So the Pittsburgh Steelers, still from this country though, right?
Wait a minute, I'll get back to you on that.
Hey, well, listen, I appreciate you both being here today as we look back on 2022 and look on 2023. You have played a vital role on this network in terms of your astuteness over politics. So the first question is for you, Bob, 2022, what were some of the highlights that you saw that, or maybe one highlight that you saw we as a people, as Black people, really see as a crowning achievement coming out of 2022?
Hmm. Um, that relates specifically to Black folk, I don't see any. I don't see any. The politically what I saw, the most important thing that I saw was during the last midterm evidence that people really were willing to disregard the label that had been placed upon them, or maybe they selected being Republican or Democrat, and actually a sufficient number to reject out of hand the kind of politics that had been ushered in by Trump. That to me is the most encouraging and perhaps enlightened thing that I saw in 2022.
Beverly, what did you see in 2022 that you feel proud of as a African American in this country, that this country is on the right track in terms of equality and fairness? Anything you saw in 2022?
The first thing I'm going to say is simply the background of 2020 and having made Joe Biden president, because most of the good things that we saw in 2021 and 2022 were a direct result of having a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress and a 50-50 Senate. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson would not have happened had Joe Biden not been president. Inflation reduction, child tax credits, those are all Democratic victories. Republicans do not vote for things that are generally helpful. In particular, I was of course very happy to see Reverend Warnock defeat Herschel Walker. Walker was in no way qualified to be a candidate for U.S. Senate. So I'm glad that we rallied. His victory wasn't as wide as I wish it had been, but it was a victory. I'm not going to complain.
So Beverly, so you believe that being a Democratic victory, Joe Biden's election being a Democratic victory, we should all be into the Democratic Party. You've said this countless number of times on this show that you're a staunch Democrat. Matter of fact, you've campaigned across the country. Tell us how that worked out for you this year. I know that you took train trips across the country supporting candidates against Republican candidates in other states. Were there any significant gains that we had as a result of your multiplier?
Oh, how I wish. I did make a very long train trip, but it was only one, and I traveled to Iowa to help a Democratic House candidate I had supported before. Her name is Cindy Axne. I was really thrilled to be asked to work with her again. And out I went to Iowa in late October. I worked my way up and down as many urban areas as I could because I specifically asked to be introduced to Black voters. She won overwhelmingly in urban areas, and I was very happy about that. But she had been redistricted and unfortunately had more rural areas added to her district, and she could not pull out wins in the rural areas. And unfortunately, she became the the last Democratic representative in Iowa. Iowa has a complete Republican Democratic House now.
Wow.
I
Hey,
did my
so
best.
Bob, let me ask you a question about Democrats, Republicans. Does it make sense as a strategy for African Americans in America to put all their eggs in one basket? So we all join the Democratic Party. What's the leverage for us to ever get anything? Do we have a reason to believe everything that they say that they do or can do for us?
Good lead in, Michael, because you know what my answer is to that. First of all, I believe in open primaries. I do not believe in, I believe that it is against our interest, not just for black folk or African American people, but everybody that believes that power belongs in the hands of the people. The two-party system is the antithesis of that entire notion. So no, we as a people, we should not be wed to any party where we have to beg to be invited, where we have to fight to take a seat, and where we only get talked about when it comes time to vote.
So you're in favor of a three-party system?
I'm in favor of as many parties as the people want. I believe that I do not believe in closed primaries. I believe that if you get enough votes, you win, and it shouldn't make any difference what organization you're a part of. Because I'm not voting for the organization; I'm voting for the person.
When you look back,
Supposedly.
when you look back on 2022, Bob, what were the significant gains that blacks made with Joe Biden in office, or what were the significant promises that he made that you feel as though we still got an opportunity to um, gain on?
Well, you know, the biggest improvement politically for black folk or African Americans under Biden was simple access. I mean, just the ability to talk to somebody in a position of authority who has significant compassion to act upon your concerns. That's been missing for at least the last 4 years. So to me, that the other things that Biden did largely that benefited black folk were fine. I mean, they generally benefited everybody, and when they benefit everybody, they benefit African Americans as well. Although not necessarily targeted, but certainly there's not much I could think of that wouldn't be an improvement over what it had been.
Beverly, let me ask you a question. I see that you have an answer to Bob's comments. Go ahead.
I would say that a lot of the things that have benefited us, and I know Bob is going to agree with this, would be things we haven't seen. There have been a large number of federal and appellate court judges that have been nominated by the Biden administration. There has been much greater diversity, and they're getting losing my language, they're getting seated, period. In the Republican administration, diverse judges just didn't get appointed. They didn't get approved. When Obama had diverse judges nominated, Republicans just held them up. Because Biden has had the Democratic House and Senate, he has been able to put forward appellate judges, federal judges that we don't know about, but that are actually there doing good for more people. That's a victory. We don't see it, we don't know about it, but it is to our benefit. I think Bob will agree with me on that one.
Let me ask you another question, Bev. So is Joe Biden and Hunter Biden the consummate example of white privilege?
Is Joe Biden the consummate example of white
Is
privilege?
Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, the classic example of white privilege? We saw that in the Capitol. We talked about who was it? We talked about William J. Walker, who was the Sergeant of Arms for the U.S. Senate. He said that the insurrectionists on January 6th had white privilege because if they were black, there would have been a considerable amount more murders or deaths if blacks had stormed the Capitol as whites did. When you look at Hunter Biden and the fact that he could gain a job over in Ukraine, oh, lo and behold, we're in the war with Ukraine. So to say, we just gave $50 billion Would anybody have been able to get that if their father wasn't the vice president of this country when it was gained?
That's a good question, and I really don't see what it has to do with the way blacks would be treated if they stormed the Capitol. I mean, we know the answer to that. When there was a rumor even that Black Lives Matter was going to stage any sort of demonstration at the Lincoln Memorial, and as black folks, we love the Lincoln Memorial. We're not going to do anything to harm it. There are the photos of armed guardsmen practically 6 feet apart at every interval, waiting for us to do nothing. White insurrectionists, give every indication well in advance about what they're going to do on January 6th, and they essentially get walked in. So yeah, that's a difference between, unfortunately, being a black person who has little standing in the eyes of the law and being a white person who is, essentially the normative American consumer. They're going to get what they want. As for Hunter Biden, when you're a member of the president's family, other people make opportunities available to you that they don't make to others. For example, think about Donald Trump's very unqualified children and all of the access they got. Much more money and access than Hunter Biden could ever imagine.
Interesting correlation there between the Biden family and the Trump family for us to think that we could believe either one when they get in power. And I guess my correlation between the treatment of the insurrectionists on January 6th and how we treat someone that can gain access because their dad is in power, how can we trust either family as a community when they both seem to be self-serving? Bob, any thoughts on that?
Well, if the January 6th group had been organized by the same folk for the same purpose and under the same direction as the people, and they had been black, they would have been treated exactly the same. I don't think black or white was the issue on January 6th. I think power was the issue, and it just so happened that the people who could be organized around an issue that were willing to take that step happened to be white. But I don't think to Donald Trump it didn't make any difference what color they were. Now, I just take it from a little different point of view. I don't think that, and the question that you raised about nepotism, about doing favors or selecting people or services or gifts on grounds that only a certain group of people have access to, whether by virtue of blood or marriage or whatever it may be, is never going to stop. I mean, it's never going to stop. But you have to have people who are making the decisions whose ultimate integrity is such that you believe that they know where to draw the line, that they know when enough is enough, when they know when too much is too much. But the notion that the father sitting in a chair and the daughter comes in and says, "Dad, I haven't heard from Spellman yet, and I know that can you just have somebody call and find out where I am on the list?" And that dad's not going to do it. Come on. So that's my thought.
So you think it's just business as usual? It's nothing wrong with that. So Bev, you made a comment earlier about the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed by the Biden administration. Is that an act that really black people, because we said 2023, or it's been said that 2023 is going to be a very difficult year in our economy, and we know that it is our communities that seem to always suffer the greatest. Do you think that Inflation Reduction Act is going to be of any benefit to the black community and keep inflation at a minimum in 2023?
To the degree that it benefits any community, it will benefit the black community. This is something that's going to apply equally, across groups, as Bob said. If something benefits everyone, then it benefits us as well. Are there going to be specific actions that any administration takes that are essentially of benefit mostly to Black people? No, that's not going to happen. But will we benefit when everyone else does? Yes, of course we will. I don't know what's going to happen with inflation in 2023. I mean, we do know, and Bob and I need to tell people while we're here on the air, that it's certainly not the president that's responsible for the level of inflation in this country. If it were, they'd be acting on it a lot quicker than they do.
So why is it that every time that there's issues with gas prices or eggs, and we know that eggs are almost $6 a dozen or a gallon, whatever way you buy your eggs, right? Why is it that every time that there's a war, why is it there every time that there's a perception of inequity in this country that the president takes the credit for that, just like they take credit for good stuff? I mean, isn't that the way it works?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
So you said that Biden is not responsible for inflation where voters think that he is.
Well, voters are wrong. I think we had this discussion on another show. You had a woman who talked about inflation being a function of Democratic administrations, and I gave her a little bit of history about how high inflation was during the 80s when Republicans were in power. In every other country in the world, inflation is at a higher rate currently than it is in the US. So if Americans want to say, well, Joe Biden is doing a terrible job, he is responsible for inflation, then they've got to say the same of every other leader in every other country. Wow, these people aren't doing anything about inflation. No, we know why.
Very, very interesting perspective, because when you look at the price of gas, and the price of gas this summer was outrageous, and Joe Biden, prior to the midterms, which were in many states, July, June, he opened up the oil reserves, right?
That helped, I'm sure.
He opened up the oil reserves that brought the price of gases down. But yet you say that they don't have the ability to affect inflation. The same thing with trade embargoes, be it with China or be it with Russia. When they cut off the trade to Russia, it inflated the gas prices and people went zonkers, and they blamed Joe Biden. So prices is a byproduct of inflation. And there are people that believe that Joe Biden, President Trump, they all run on economic reasons, have a great say in the economy of this country.
Then one of the things that I hope that Black people, African Americans will do in 2023 is to read up more about where their information comes from and what they ought or ought not to believe. Too many of us, too many people in general, no matter what they look like, repeat what they hear from sources that they don't know.
Example?
You hear someone say, "Oh, the president's responsible for inflation." Do they know that? Where does that information come from? Does it come from economists? Does it come from a political party?
Let's say it comes from the Republicans, and then a week later, Joe Biden releases oil from the oil reserves, and the price of gas goes down.
The price of gas goes down somewhat because of that.
Let's take a look at Trump. When Trump got into office, people felt that taxes were very high. All of a sudden, he cuts the federal taxes. You don't think that has an effect on people's daily lives and what they take home?
Well, he didn't do that.
The government plays a huge factor in how people are able to spend, consume, and live in this country. And the president, I believe, is elected based on what people feel that he can affect in terms of their own economic situation.
And people believe that. And as I said, they need to examine what they believe. For example, Donald Trump can't cut taxes by himself. It takes a Congress to do that. Those are the people who decide what your taxes are. And when he cut taxes, he didn't cut them for regular people. He cut them for his friends. The rest of us didn't get any tax
Does that go
breaks.
back to that statement that when one benefits, we all benefits? Is that part of that statement that you made?
No, we're really talking about two different things, and we
Okay,
both
so
know
it doesn't
that.
count there.
If Donald Trump decides that he wants to cut taxes on the richest 1% of people, we're not the richest 1% of people. We don't benefit. If he wants to cut taxes on those of us who were in the lower echelon, more people benefit. But clearly, it is in the interest of some people to work with their pals and enrich them,
How
and
about the
forget about the rest of
90,000
us.
IRS agents that are going to be unleashed on the American people as part of the Reduction Inflation Act that Joe Biden says that he's going to stock the IRS with? People are very skeptical as to
I'm
whether
so
they will go
glad.
with that 1% or whether it'll really influence the middle class and lower class people, and that's who they're going to target because that's the low hanging fruit. Do you
Now, I,
believe
I'm
that?
so glad you asked that. Where did you hear that these 87,000 IRS agents were going to be unleashed on unsuspecting middle class
I
taxpayers?
said that's what people believe.
And I want to know why they believe it. Where did they get that information? I don't want people to tell me about 87,000 IRS agents being unleashed on unsuspecting middle class Americans taxpayers because it isn't true. People repeat things that are not true all the time. The fact is that during the Trump administration, besides not wanting his tax accounts to be examined, he didn't want any of his other rich friends' tax accounts to be examined either. He cut the IRS. The 87,000, if that's the right number, people who are being hired to replace folks that we shouldn't have lost in the first place, and to give the IRS more ability to audit the taxes of people who are richer. So one of the things that frustrates me is hearing repeated, oh, these 87,000 IRS agents, they're coming to get us. If you hear that, who told you? What is their reason for telling you that? Do you even know whether or not it's true? So for 2023, I want people to do homework. I don't want them to repeat what they've heard. I want us to get out of the land of, oh, I heard, and into the land of, this is what I know.
Hey, let me ask Bob a question. Bob, you represent a lot of black businesses. You go before and you fight for minority opportunity. Did your businesses give you a sense of whether they did well last year or they did better in 2019?
Well, the no one did particularly well last year, but
Can you qualify no one?
because I would say about half of my clients are not African American owned companies; they're European owned companies.
But
And
when one does well, all does well. We're going to live with that statement that Beverly made.
well, it depends on what your objective is. I mean,
Make money.
and my
Make
my
money,
view is,
survive,
pardon?
pay for $6 a dozen eggs, pay for $5 a gallon gas. Everyone's objective in America is to live the capitalistic dream, right?
No, no, no. I mean, there are people who are in office and who've sought political office claiming as an objective to close the wealth gap, which is more than the income gap. Now, that doesn't mean that because income and wealth are two different things.
Yes.
See, you can close the income gap just by a stroke of a pen. I give you as much money as the other guy. But the wealth gap, particularly depending upon when the discrepancy began, is a huge deal. And that's the
So
debt.
how do you define wealth in this country? How do you define wealthy?
Um,
Do you define it as
I,
10
I,
million
you
or
know,
more? Do
if
you
I had
define
to,
it
if
as
I
100 million
had,
or more? Or is it all relative to one's circumstance? Because you give someone that's made $15,000 annually last year a bump to $70,000 a year. Now we know it takes $68,000 for one person with two children or two people with four children to just be able to break even. So how do you define wealthy to define wealth gap?
wealth is asset ownership, right? And by asset, there's only one real asset, and that's land. That's why in the Homestead Act of 1861 or 62, whatever it is, they started off giving all the white Westerners 100, or it started off at 320 acres each, but that was too much for them to handle. They cut it in half to 102, 160 acres, I think it is, so down to 160 acres. But anyway, it's land is the only real asset. Everything else is a derivative. So you cannot close, while you may close the income gap, you cannot close the wealth gap unless you put the resource, the only asset there is, in the hands of those who you've taken it from, or you've acquired it in a way that it has been to their detriment.
Hey, so question for you, Bev. You know, reparations is on the agenda this year, and we're playing something devil's advocate. Reparations is on the agenda. Every African American in this country gets a one-way plane ticket, $100,000, and the ability to build a house in Africa. Are you taking yours and going?
No, I'm taking mine and staying here. Now, I mean,
You
do I
got to
want
take the one-way
reparations?
plane ticket. You got to take the one-way plane trip to Africa in order to get the $100,000 and
Says
build a
who?
house. Are you going?
Says who? Who says I
Says
have
the
to go
government.
somewhere? I'm
That's
sorry?
your reparations as an
No,
example. Is that something that makes sense to
then
you?
that's not reparations. That's not even a bribe.
What do you call it, Bob?
Reparations means I'm getting a lot of back pay for what my relatives didn't get paid. And other people don't get to decide what I do with it. I
Well,
get to decide
there's
what I do
thought
with it.
out here since they said since we brought you over here against your will, you said we'll send you back and we'll give you some money and we'll let you buy a house over there, and that way you can go and stay. Is that fair? Is that a
If they don't
fair?
get to make that choice, how can they tell me what to do it's on someone else's land?
What about you,
You
Bob? You
go buy
taking your one-way
property
ticket back
elsewhere.
home and your $100,000 in house? What are you gonna do?
Well, let me first try to dissuade you from the notion that they have the right to whoever to
Oh,
make the
don't
decision.
dissuade me.
Yeah,
I've been putting this on the
yes.
table as a
Let me, all
reparation
right,
deal.
let me put it this way. We became citizens of this country the same way that the other folk became citizens when our feet hit the ground. It didn't make any difference what part of the boat you came from, whether you came from the top deck or in the hole. When our feet hit the ground, we are they. We own this country as much as anybody else, and so they don't get to decide anything. We get to decide. The country, America, owes the debt. I've never said white people owe black people or African Americans. White people control the government, but the government of the country owes the debt. Now, how do we address it? We address it by putting people in positions of authority who can run the country and reverse the effects of those who did it to our detriment for 400 years.
Name
That's how we do
two
it.
people
And
who
we've
feel
begun to
that
do
can
that.
do
And
that.
we've begun to do that.
Let's, for the viewers' sake, let's pause for a minute. You said
Okay.
let's put people in place, right? Who do we need to put in place? Anybody that you would love to see in place so that we can begin to push back on some of the atrocities our communities are suffering across this country?
I don't know their name, but I know that they'd be more easily identifiable if we had open primaries. I know that they'd be more easily identifiable because it'd be easier for them to establish themselves as a viable candidate if we had open primaries.
So
They,
open
they have to
primaries for
win.
you is a matter that you would want to vote regardless of party. You want to vote for the best person. You're not going to be all in Democrat, all in Republican, all independent. You want to vote for whoever it is you want to vote for. Is that what you mean by
That
open
that
election?
that is precisely right, because then I know I can begin to teach my children to aspire to those positions, and I know that they have a legitimate opportunity if I instill them with the right kind of commitment that they can actually achieve those goals, and they don't have to worry about being labeled one thing or another. All they have to be is the best person that they can be.
Hey, so back to the question about your businesses as a comparable to
Yeah.
2019 and to last year. What do your businesses see for next year, Bob? What do your businesses in totality see? Good
Well,
year coming up?
I think caution is the word of the day, because the fundamental adjustment in the economy globally has not yet occurred. So the question is, are we really, have we crossed the threshold? Have we on the other side, on the way down, or are we still heading toward the tip? I think we're still heading toward the tip, and I think everybody's trying to be very cautious. I don't see any great expansion underway. I think that the money from the government, the rescue money, has been helpful to sustain some operations. But I think that people want to see the next round of the next presidential election before they pitch their tent really again.
Wow. So Joe Biden, should he run again? Beverly?
That's up to him. You know,
No,
I would
I'm
prefer,
asking you
I
what
would
you think.
prefer
Would you like to see Joe Biden run again?
I'm speaking for myself. I would prefer to see someone younger. I think as they did in the Congress, it's time to recognize that there are competent people who are from a different generation. You don't need everybody who's 80 and older running the government. So if it were up to me, I think the Democrats should be looking for another candidate. However, if Biden wants to run and he has supporters, then I think we need to be all out on his behalf.
So is there anybody out there in the Democratic Party now, since that's the party of choice of African Americans in this country, anybody out there that you see? And of course, we're looking at our own perspective. I know that we don't represent a
Right.
large population of people, but who's on the forefront for the Democratic Party to be president? Kamala Harris, is she a good candidate? How about Hakeem Jeffries?
I don't think Kamala Harris is going to have the standing, even as vice president, to run for president if
Not a good candidate?
Joe Biden decides not to. I have a couple of favorite candidates in mind, and I'm going to keep them to myself so as
That's
not to
not
jinx
fair.
their chances when they
That's not
decide they
fair.
will run.
That's not fair.
Oh
You,
well,
you,
who
you-
said
you're not
life
going to
was
tell
fair?
us. So we didn't know they were yours, but I mean, who are the political stars out there for the Democratic Party? If Biden, for some reason, does not run, and we're all in on the Democratic Party, who are you advocating that people begin to take a look at so that they can do what you said, start to study and read up on people in preparation?
I'm going to say that people can study and read up without any help from me. That's something that they should do themselves so that they can discover who they believe the best candidates are with the best qualifications, and then they can advocate for them. They don't need to wait for somebody else to tell them what to do or what to think. We need to find out for ourselves. So, like I said, I've got a couple of good ideas, but I don't want people to take my advice. I want them to do their own homework and
So
find
that
out.
means Bernie Sanders shouldn't run again either, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
That means Bernie Sanders should sit down as well, right?
Bernie Sanders is a Democratic socialist. He wins his Senate races in
So he'll
Vermont,
be over 80
but
years
no,
old.
he is
Anybody
not
over
going
80
to be
years old.
president ever.
Yeah. How about you, Bob? Anybody out there? Do you think Joe Biden should run again?
No, and I like Gavin Newsom.
That's the governor of California that was recalled.
Big state, lots
One
of
that was
votes there.
recalled.
Yeah, I mean I like him because of he was one of the few Democrats that was willing to engage in the fight at the level that it was being fought. I'm talking about between the so-called two parties. I mean, he was willing to engage at a level that nobody else was. They were afraid that they wanted to go high, and he was willing to go low, if you will, at least in my opinion. So at this, and that's a snapshot today. The world will be different tomorrow this time, maybe.
Wow. Hey, what's going on in our cities? Our cities last year seemed to have continue to have significant effect of the pandemic educationally, crime, economically. What do we need to do is the government, because one of the things that you seem to be saying is that the government shapes and molds a lot of the agendas and abilities in our states, right? Even though states are supposed to be autonomous in terms of some of its laws, the government's money influences quite a bit. Our urban cities, which many are predominantly or majority black, what's going on in our cities? How do we get crime under control? How do we begin to grasp education as an important tool to move our communities forward? Bev, you want to take a stab at that? What are your thoughts?
Well, for me, the thing that would most reduce crime would be for the country to have sensible gun ownership policies. I've been hoping for that ever since Columbine, but it seems that there are too many people who believe that freedom means that they and other people get to kill as many folks as they want. The fact is, no matter what kind of gun policy you have in your state, it only matters where the next state is that has a weak gun policy. Many of the northeastern states have very strong gun policies, but people can ship guns up US 95 very easily. You can't have one ironclad policy in one state when your border is actually, when your border is perforated, when it's easy for others to get through. So if we had more national gun ownership policies that made sense, it would be harder for everybody to get their hands on weapons. The reason it's easy for people in inner cities to get their hands on weapons is because it's easy for the wrong people to get them there. If it were harder for everybody, it would be harder for those kids as well. And
Bob?
let's not act as though most crime is in the major cities. Most crime is people can count urban crimes. They tend to happen, in concentrated areas. They don't count all the spread out crimes, the crimes that happen in other places. There are way more crimes that happen out of urban areas.
Yeah, well, the unfortunate thing is that almost 50% of the correctional facilities in this country are filled by African Americans, as you say, even though we're only 13% of the population, but 50% of the jail population, much of the crime is not necessarily committed by us. Now, Joe Biden, he freed or pardoned a significant number of blacks for the misaligned marijuana laws a
Yes.
number of years ago. And he also was part back in the 90s, right, of incarcerating with that legislation a lot of African Americans as well.
You know what? I love it when people say that because the fact is that there were plenty of black members of Congress, some of whom are still in office today, who are huge advocates for that crime control bill. They were huge advocates for it. They said we've got too much crime in our neighborhoods. Let's do something to stop it. But I see people saying, "Oh, that Joe Biden, he was for that." Well, yeah, he was, but he wasn't there by himself. There were lots of black politicians who were there too. So I'm not going to blame him, just as I'm not going to credit him. I'm
No,
going to say
I don't
that
think it's
that
a
it's
matter
it's
of
shared
blaming.
equally.
I think it's a matter that he's the president, and
Yeah,
let's continue to take a look at his record. Let's
absolutely.
continue as a community, as you said, to see whether there is a reason. Because I think if the guy is doing a great job, I don't care if he's 89 years old. If it's someone that we can lay our trust in, then hey, let's bring him back for a second round. Bob, what do you think? What's going on in our urban cities, man? Why? I mean, in your city, Baltimore, they had a 7-year-old shot in the head yesterday.
Well, I'll be general and then I'll get specific. Number one, we have to get rid of the ideology of hate generally. We got to get rid of the ideology of hate, period, if we're going to stop. But more specifically, as it relates to crime in Baltimore, we're going to have to, the community has got to do the same thing here as happened in New York. The term paddy wagon came from the fact that the Irish were the victims of police brutality in New York. So much so that the vehicle came to be known as a paddy wagon. Well, the Irish figured out that the only way to stop that is to take over the police department. So the Irish control the police. So we have to. What am I saying? We have to reestablish the fact that being a police officer in Baltimore City is an honorable profession. And not only is it an honorable profession, but it is a necessary profession for you to have if you ultimately have control of your community and to make the contribution to your community that you desire to make. We've got to reestablish that, and because it makes a difference. You can't The community stop crime, not police. Police, every now and then, if they might be in the wrong place at the right time and they see somebody doing something, every now and then somebody will call with a tip that really is worth something. But for the most part, crime goes unchecked because communities don't do any checking. There's no internal community accountability because there's nobody to call. And they're not going to call Ghostbusters. And
So
they're not going to call police that they don't trust.
There's not an economic component to some of the criminal activity. Like, for instance, let's take the marijuana legislations in most states and most municipalities. We were arrested by the thousands, the tens of the thousands, and Joe Biden just freed or pardoned quite a few, but yet we get no economic benefit of the legalization of cannabis in many of these states and many of these municipalities. Is there a correlation between a lack of economic opportunity and fairness in terms of the crime in these communities as well?
I've got to say, Bob,
there is, I think, a somewhat of a correlation, but there's no causation. I mean, you're really talking about two different things. The degree to which a particular law is enforced in a particular way against a particular community doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the law. It means there's something wrong with the people who are enforcing it. In other words, there will always be, to the street cop, to the beat cop, there will always be an opportunity, and there should be, to decide, is this person somebody who needs to be arrested, or is this person somebody who I need to say, hey man, just stop it and keep going about your business? There's always going to be an opportunity, and there should be an opportunity for a police officer to say to this young kid, hey, I saw you pick that off the shelf, put it back, go home so that I don't have to take you in. Or to lock him up because I saw him doing it 3 times before and I told him and he kept stealing and wouldn't listen to me. That kind of discretion every police officer has and is necessary to have, because one size doesn't fit all. The problem is the crime control bill has a reputation of taking the discretion away and locking everybody up. And when you do that, what do you lock? You lock up the low-hanging fruit. You're not going to go ahead and lock up somebody where we got one kid every mile. You go to the block where there's 25 gathered, and you get 25 at a time.
I wanted to remind Bob when he made that wonderful distinction between income and wealth. People who have been freed from prison and had their drug convictions, thrown away,
right,
are not the people who have assets. They're not the people
right,
who have wealth. The people who have wealth are the people who are able to take advantage of the new marijuana laws. In Boston, where I live, there's a big former ranking police officer who's a board member on some of these marijuana stores now. And every time I see him, I think to myself, you used to arrest people for this, and now you're getting the benefit. What we need to do, and I know at least one person who has done that, is to get groups in the community.
So you're saying a police officer has wealth, or he has access, or is it what we call he has privilege?
He has privilege. He has wealth. He has experience in law enforcement that works both ways. When people needed him to arrest folks on minor marijuana, issues, he was there and able to do that. But he's also then someone who has a lot of expertise about the issue. Now he's called on to provide security for people who are legitimately selling, marijuana. People in communities need to pool their wealth. If you can pool your wealth, maybe you can buy a marijuana dispensary. But individuals are not going to have enough money to do it by themselves. You already have to be one of those people with a lot of assets. If you're not a person with individual assets, you need to join with other people.
Folks up here have responsibility to communities to assist in communities gaining, or is it capitalistic as usual? You're laughing there, Bob. What do you think?
Well, look. I don't, the capitalistic system that exists in this country and worldwide presumes the continuation of two groups of people: poor people and everybody else who works for rich people. and and all we keep talking about is cutting off the top of the weeds, but nobody wants to dig the weed up by its roots. So yeah, do the folk on the screen have an obligation? Yes, they have an obligation as much as anybody who's benefited from the system.
What does reparations look like to you, Bob? You didn't like the one-way plane ticket, $100,000 and home in Nigeria, where you came from. So what does reparations look like to you? What do you owe?
Well, there's two different levels of reparation. There are those who can prove by lineage that they were specifically harmed by the involuntary servitude, and then there's the class, because the slavery was against a class of folks. They didn't trust. They gave you names. So now for the class settlement, it would not go to individuals at all. It would go into some trust of a nonprofit, but income producing, and that trust and the income from that trust would go to fund other businesses that provided income and employment to members of the black community. But nobody could profit from an interest in the trust itself, and nobody would, and the salaries would be fixed.
What about you, Bev?
I like that idea because we do have to have something that's community focused. However, I can prove that I am a descendant of enslaved people on both sides of my family. And as I said, the US government has back pay with a lot of interest that they need to split among a lot of people who are children of stolen Africans or descendants of stolen Africans. And it's up to us to decide what we want to do with our reparations. I mean, in general, you could say the current equivalent of 40 acres and a mule would be, a suburban home paid off in an electric SUV, which is, I'm making a little bit of a joke, but we need to have the ability to have the same assets as other people. As Bob would say, not just income, but assets, so that we have something to leave to our descendants as other people have done for centuries.
Yeah, that's a profound analogy, particularly when you look at a capitalistic system which thrives on the middle to lower class poor people, the profit margin of a capitalistic system. And I think that's part of the reason why you don't see it. Bev, up in your area, we had a young lady who was just put as the president of Harvard University, and that is Claudine Gay. Congratulations, kudos. So what's the significance of this from an educational perspective that now President Gay of Harvard University has been named the first Black African-American president of Harvard?
Well, I think this is great recognition for her abilities and achievements. And I think also, like most people, I would not want to be the first Black anything, because you also know that her achievement is going to come with a lot of criticism, a lot of people who can't wait to catch her doing something wrong, with folks who will question her credentials and abilities. So I'm just glad to see her have this opportunity to do what she is able to do. But I think that she and others who like her need to be on the lookout for folks who will try to undermine her, and they will.
Hey, Bob, what did this do to the Black image last year? The slap by Will across Chris Rock's face when you look at two African American men. Did this harm Blacks going forward in any way?
No, not as far as I'm concerned.
How about you, Bev? Any thoughts about that? What do you think? Just,
Yeah, I was of
support
the.
Will Smith?
No, I definitely did not support Will Smith.
Do you support Will Smith?
I'm of the. It unfortunately reminded me of the dress them up but can't take them out school.
Oh, wow. Bob, how about you? Did you watch the movie Emancipation? Was that an oxymoron that Will starred in the movie Emancipation? Slapping the black man?
I would not elevate this encounter to anything that was presented in that movie. This was just I can't even repeat it. No. It's not worthy. It's not worthy to be discussed in that context.
Hey, Bob, I know you get ready to go to the game. We're down to the last 2 minutes. Deion Sanders started to revive historically black universities. Did you know that he lost two toes?
That he lost two toes.
Yeah, he's an amputee. Last March, man, he lost his big toe and an index toe on his foot to save his life, man. And you
Oh,
know, the significance of Dion, people believe, is that he got African Americans that are looked at in terms of wealth from an athletic perspective. That's why Herschel Walker was induced or seduced to run in the Senate. That's what it is that we're given sometimes as a profile is our athleticism. But he's going to University of Colorado. Do you think he should have left Jackson State to go there?
I think he should have done more at Jackson State to establish
He
the
was on
really
to something,
important.
wasn't he?
Pardon?
He was on to something with
Yes,
recruiting
yes.
top
He
blacks to go
and
to
and,
historically
and,
black universities.
and if he'd done more to institutionalize that principle before he left, he could have gone anywhere he wanted. I don't know whether he should have stayed another year or another 2 years, but he needed to institutionalize the principle that the talent within our community ought to, on a preferential basis, be attracted to our community and retained in our community. If he could establish, he didn't stay long enough to establish that as a matter of principle. Rather, it looked more like a carpetbagger. So that's my problem.
Hey, Bev, your thoughts of Sidney Poitier, the constant gentleman? We lost him last year. What words do you have to say about Sidney?
A pioneer. You know, he put himself on the line, and I believe probably as someone who wasn't necessarily U.S. born, he probably felt as though he didn't have as many obstacles to face as U.S. born Americans. So I'm glad he went out on the limb.
Even though his family suffered the same, they were African Bahamians, you
Yes.
know. So finally, as we go, we sign off. It's been a great show. Bill Russell up there in your town. Bill Russell, great American. He was a rebellious. We lost Bill last year as well. He was a rebellious black man, almost angry. And one of the first black coach in the NBA. Bob, anything to say about Bill in terms of the type of human being? Are we missing these type of icons, the Sidney Poitiers and the Bill Russells, who were great at what they did, but they were also great human beings and civil rights activists and used their imagery to further along our people?
We absolutely do miss him and others like him, and but even more tragic is the fact that we're not even that our children never knew they existed at all because they're not being taught. That's even more tragic.
Well, maybe what's even more tragic is that there's not a power of example to these two great human beings that,
Yeah.
you know, we can point to. Well, listen, I really appreciate you both coming on today. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to our viewers out there. 60 Minutes in Black America. We'll see you next Sunday at 6 o'clock. Bev, stay warm in Boston. Bob, go Ravens.
It's warm up here. Happy New Year to you both and to all your listeners.
It's
Thank
always
you.
a pleasure to have you, Bev. Always a pleasure to have you, Bob. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. You have a good night.
So Bev, I just want you like once a month. That's all, just once a
You
month.
can have me once a month.
Okay, good. So
Really?
we'll do like the third, whatever, first or
Okay.
third. So I'll let you know because I tell you, you almost stumped me, man. You're very astute, man. I really enjoy. I think that's why I got several texts after your last show.
Mm-hmm.
People just like your engagement, your honesty.
Mm-hmm.
And matter of fact, it would be great to let you do one of my shows one day, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah, you know how shy and retiring I am.
Hey, well, listen, give your husband my regards
I
and
will.
tell him he did a great job with the trees. Stunning. You sent me pictures of his of the trees. You had, what'd you
Mm-hmm.
say, you had 3 trees or was it 2?
Well, we had a huge tree in the living room. I don't think I sent you a picture of my tree. I have a smaller tree in the kitchen. And then for nostalgia, we had one of those old aluminum trees. It
Oh, you mean like a silver old
Yeah, like an aluminum tree.
I
For
remember
nostalgia,
those.
we had an aluminum tree in our bedroom. But December
How
23rd,
high are your ceilings in your bedrooms? I know those old Boston houses. You have high
yeah, the
ceilings?
ceilings in the bedroom, they're not all that high, but then aluminum trees, they're not that high either. But fortunately and unfortunately, we lost our last cat in January of 2022.